Survival Challenge Day. 19. Michelle's actions are quite baffling. Despite being clearly famished, she did not seek food, but went through great lengths to build a kitchen. Perhaps this is what they call a sense of ritual. Today's breakfast was nothing new. Just wild grass stewed with more wild grass. She can clearly feel her physical functions declining, not just from eating grass, but also from a lack of salt intake. Michelle admitted she didn't bring any salt, and has been sustaining herself on her own bodily fluids, which you can imagine. She is now desperate to eat some fish, so she went to check the fish trap by the lake only to find it lying idly on the shore, seemingly raided by something else. After a day of waiting, she ended up lonely and miserable. Remember the troll knife Bick forged with iron nails? He has now crafted the handle and guard, making it look quite convincing. Initially, he wanted to use it to kill a musk deer, but that seems unrealistic now. It works well for chopping wood, though. With no luck in fishing these days, Bick decided to create a fishing trap. He mentioned that even with his ample fat reserves, he has lost about 30 kilograms in less than a month, hinting at impending problems. While Bick was seriously making the fishing trap, a strange noise suddenly came from behind. He immediately got up to check and found 2 bear cubs playing by the lake. Bick quickly used his bear deterrent, thankful that the cubs' parents were not around, averting a crisis. Otherwise, he would have had to use his satellite phone. After calming down, he continued making the fishing trap, occasionally looking back. Once done, Bick threw the fish trap into the water, hoping for a catch. Meanwhile, Matt might be struggling emotionally. He climbed a tall tree to enjoy the view, not for any particular reason, but because he missed his family too much. As autumn progresses and temperatures drop, Matt's fat reserves are depleting quickly. He decided to gather some dry grass to insulate his shelter, but accidentally disturbed a wasp's nest, which left him questioning life. Matt is now faltering and mentioned that even if he can't endure, he shouldn't face attacks and ridicule online. He argued that without experiencing it firsthand, one shouldn't have the right to comment, almost extinguishing the campfire with his complaints. Survival Challenge Day 21. Michelle's lips are cracked and her teeth are yellowing. Signs of severe malnutrition. Her weight has dropped by 17%. Seeing that the fish trap caught nothing, she finally decided to use a bow and arrow to hunt around. This hunting method is new to me. She actually sat on a stool waiting for prey to come to her. This was a desperate move by Michelle. After more than 20 days of eating grass to stave off hunger, she no longer had the strength. At that moment, something surprising happened. Michelle said she saw a goose in the distance, so she decided to try shooting it with arrows. After a round, she returned, but the goose did not. Michelle couldn't continue, and her only option now is to call and quit the competition, or her health will suffer. Many might think she's weak, but I admire her, especially how she managed to obtain salt. Not many could do what she did. The camera moves to Nate, who has been sleeping on the ground for many days and now has back pain. To improve his sleep quality, he decided to make a hammock. Nate first made a frame with some sticks, then tied gathered ropes to make a net, and finally tested it inside his shelter. It's comfortable, and he's no longer worried about back pain. Clay has been returning empty-handed from fishing lately, so he decided to focus on hunting. He enjoys and has experience in searching for prey. After walking and stopping in the forest for over 2 hours, he finally found some fresh deer tracks. Clay smiled, as if seeing the $500,000 prize waving at him. To avoid startling the prey, he decided to rest overnight and come back the next day to harvest. Survival Challenge Day. 22. Matt said he was knocked down by hunger. He had to pull himself together and continue fishing at the lake. Singing while fishing, he appeared carefree. Perhaps his singing was too terrible, as the fish refused to approach him. After a morning without any catch, Matt packed up his fishing line, sighed, turned around, and called the show's crew to say he was leaving. He was mentally prepared for criticism. In fact, Matt's withdrawal was expected, as he had shown a desire to exit 2 days ago, but was just preempting any harsh criticism. Now, only 6 contestants remain. After finding deer tracks, Clay set out early in the morning, with his bow and arrows, racing towards the prize money. Upon reaching his destination, he discovered fresh droppings, confirming the prey was nearby. Soon after, he spotted the animal and immediately shot an arrow towards it. The swift whoosh of the arrow excited Clay so much that he couldn't hold his camera steady. This shot was crucial for winning the $500,000 prize. Judging by his expression, he seemed to have hit the target, but he couldn't be sure if it was a vital hit. Instead of rushing forward, he quietly followed the deer. Quickly, he found frothy blood on the grass, indicating a lung shot. Nearby, he found a broken arrow, almost ensuring his success. Indeed, the deer lay in the nearby bushes. Overwhelmed, tears streamed down Clay's face. It was a 60-kilogram black-tailed deer. Although it didn't yield as much meat as Roland's beef, in the current situation, securing a top 3 position was almost certain. The next priority was to protect the food and not waste it to guarantee the $500,000 prize. The most important task now was to quickly transport the meat back to camp before bears could find it. In preparation for hibernation, bears would stop at nothing for food. Without a backpack, Clay had to haul the meat back to camp bit by bit, covering a one-way distance of 4 kilometers. Despite the day's exertion, he didn't feel tired. By nightfall, he had managed to bring back all the meat, leaving over 40 kilograms of prime cuts after accounting for the offal and miscellaneous parts. The challenge now was to consume it within 2 months. How to distribute and preserve the meat became a problem. Storing it in the shelter risked bear attacks, so he decided to temporarily hang the meat in a tree, hoping the bears wouldn't untie the knots. After a tiring day, Clay finally enjoyed his dinner of fried deer heart in deer fat, a meal that definitely required tissues. Meanwhile, Colt was still surviving on wild fruits and vegetables, collecting some each morning as reserve food. He found a place to store this food, and fortunately, had not been robbed by local animals. Unexpectedly, that night, a bear visited. When Colt went to the storeroom for breakfast, he found that a bear had eaten half of his berries, angering him enough to nearly crush his teeth. To secure more food, Colt decided to make a fishing trap. After seeing his work, it was clear he was a professional. Others' traps seemed amateur in comparison. His fish cage was not only large but also exquisitely made. It was puzzling why he hadn't used this skill earlier. After finishing the fish cage, Colt rowed to the center of the lake, tied a rope with floats, and threw it in to wait for his catch. The scene shifted to Nate, who had become skeletal. Desperate for food, he went to the dock to check for any fish caught. Nate wasn't hopeful, but to his surprise, there was a fish on the line. He could see a large fish in the water and was extremely excited. Just as the big fish was about to be landed, Nate's frustration exploded, and he began cursing nonstop. After being hungry for so long and finally seeing a glimmer of hope, the outcome was a severe blow. Clay was worried about hanging the meat in the tree, unsure of its safety from bears and the current temperature not allowing it to last many days. He decided to build a smokehouse to reduce the moisture in the meat and prevent bacterial growth. Clay started with a log frame, added a wire mesh for hanging the meat, filled gaps with moss to keep the smoke in, and finished with a small door cut with a steel saw. The structure was high quality, surpassing other contestants' shelters. After the roof was completed, he cut the meat into strips, hung them on the indoor wires, and started smoking using pine branches. His effort deserved admiration. The scene shifted to Nate, who, learning from a previous mistake with a big fish, began crafting a net from a branch. Over 20 days, he had lost 15 kilograms, largely consuming just Cloud Mountain tea. Nate tested his new net with himself as bait and was pleased with the results. Surprisingly, he caught a small fish, proving his effort wasn't in vain and sparing him from more tea. Teresa's shelter was the slowest to build. After sleeping in a tent for over 20 days, she moved into a dugout only to be smoked out minutes later. The smoke couldn't escape due to the waterproof fabric on the roof, posing a risk to her lungs, so she continued sleeping in her tent until a chimney could be installed. On day 24, Nate was crafting again, this time making a lure fishing rod with even fancier components than Clay's. It was puzzling why he hadn't made it sooner, rather than waiting until he was extremely hungry. 2 hours later, the rod was finished, but Nate started vomiting due to drinking rainwater collected in a pot that contained squirrel feces, likely with salmonella causing nausea and fever. Nate, concerned for his health, finally called the show's crew. As he was leaving, snowflakes began to fall, signaling tougher conditions ahead for the remaining 5 contestants. Survival Challenge Day. 26, Bick went to check his fishing trap but found nothing, not even a trace. After losing over 40 pounds in 20 days, he desperately dreamed of eating fish to regain his strength. With no catch, Bick tried fishing, but his skills were lacking. He struggled to cast the line properly, and I worried he might hook his own arm. After several fruitless hours, it seemed like even the lake gods pitied him, practically gifting him a fish. Thanking the fish verbally, Bick quickly subdued it with a stick. This was his first successful catch in over 20 days, and he was finally able to enjoy a decent meal. To avoid attracting bears with the scent, Bick sang continuously while cooking the fish with wild vegetables. He savored every part of his hard-earned meal. The camera then shifted to Ross. Last night's harsh winds made sleeping impossible in her flimsy shelter. To improve it, Ross decided to add a door. She removed nails from found planks and nailed 3 sticks together to form a door frame, finishing it with some pine branches. Despite her efforts to win the $500,000 prize, it seemed a long shot. Unlike Ross, Teresa maintained her dignity even in survival mode, not forgetting to wash her hair. Today, her goal was to make smoked meat. Teresa collected stones nearby and played Ross Tetris with them. Many wondered what she had been eating these days. I knew she ate some insects while digging a pit, but hadn't seen her eat since. Perhaps women endure hunger better. After a busy period, Teresa's fireplace and chimney were complete. The fire lit well, and the smoke efficiently vented outside. The fireplace would provide warmth in the winter, allowing her to finally move in comfortably. If Teresa can secure food, she might go far. On day 26, Clay began to boast under the spotlight. He mentioned that although he caught a deer, the future was uncertain as other competitors might also have their successes. Now, only 5 contestants remain, and the competition has entered a tense phase. Despite being the strongest contender and having caught a deer, Clay was not assured of victory. A heavy snowfall was approaching, which would soon deplete the berries and wild vegetables, so he persisted in fishing by the lake every day. Unfortunately, he hadn't caught anything for the past month due to local regulations prohibiting the use of bait. While fishing, Clay was suddenly distracted by a huge creature. It turned out to be a half-ton grizzly bear taking a stroll. Clay ignored it and continued fishing, demonstrating the spirit of fishing enthusiasts. Just as he was getting into the rhythm, he looked up to find the bear approaching him. This situation would be overwhelming for anyone, so Clay quickly climbed a tree to escape. The bear seemed to sense hostility and ran into the woods. Clay climbed down to check the direction the bear had taken and realized it was heading towards the camp, where $3 million worth of food was stored. He decided to follow and check on it to avoid a potential theft. Near the shelter, he found footprints clearly left by the bear. He knew he had to be more cautious moving forward. The scene shifts to Bick, whose cave had a new visitor that had left holes in his clothes the previous night. Despite his hunger, Bick couldn't do much about it. He missed the days when he could eat fish, so he decided to continue fishing by the lake. The path to the lake was covered with snow, and he had to be careful with each step, yet he still fell. Fortunately, the sprain in his ankle was not severe, as withdrawing from the competition over such an incident would be embarrassing. While fishing, Bick sang about his hunger and questioned why the lake god wouldn't give him food. He had intentionally gained weight before the competition, eating crazily for 3 months to gain 41 pounds. But he had lost over 50 pounds in 1 month at the location. If he lost another 40 pounds, he would be forced to withdraw. As the day ended, the lake god still hadn't provided any food, and at midnight, a rat visited Bick, chewing on his arrow feathers. Frustrated from the day's events, Bick was ready to attack with his club. Colt's situation was not much better. Although he had stored a lot of mushrooms, the constant vegetarian diet had made him lose a lot of weight, and he was sweating profusely with little effort. His only hope was the fish trap in the lake. Paddling out in his boat to check the traps, Colt felt a strong resistance as he pulled up the rope. It was like a tug of war. Excited at first, he found it increasingly difficult to pull. The fish trap seemed to be stuck on the seabed. Having put significant effort into making the trap, Colt tried his utmost to retrieve it but couldn't. Reluctantly, he cut the rope and abandoned the trap, returning to shore disheartened. Teresa is treating her wounds after a near miss while fishing yesterday. She spent hours by the fire to recover, only to discover burns on her inner thigh and blisters on her knee today. Her thermal pants also got burned. After taking care of her knee and pants, She went to check her fishing lines by the lake. Sadly, not only was there no catch, but the lines had frozen. Thinking about the risks she took to set them up, Teresa felt utterly hopeless and burst into tears by the shore. It's day 34 of the challenge. Bick has noticeably lost a lot of weight. To add some charm, he decides to braid his beard into a ponytail today. After spending the day fishing without any catch, he battles a rat at night. Holding a club and repeatedly saying, "I'm going to kill you," he is furious because the rat damaged his ankle guard and left droppings on it as an insult. Now, Bick and the rat are sworn enemies. On day 35, Ross, having eaten a rabbit 2 days ago, hopes to catch another. Unfortunately, after checking the traps, not only is there no catch, but there are also many bobcat tracks nearby. Even if he catches a rabbit, a bobcat might snatch it first. With no other options, Ross heads back to the shelter. After walking around, his toes start to sting. Removing his shoes at the shelter, he discovers 2 toes have turned purple from frostbite, a sign of deep frostbite that could lead to necrosis without prompt treatment. Finally, we switch to Clay, who must look the part as a leader. His genuine leather sofa is ready, and sitting on it with a wooden teacup is extremely comfortable. As he enjoys his tea in the sun, he wonders what the other contestants would think if they saw him now. While Clay relaxes, his moment is ruined by an unexpected visitor, the grizzly bear from a few days ago, apparently fond of his food. Armed with a bow and arrows, Clay is ready to deter the bear for good. He wants the bear to know he is not to be messed with, and that his food is not easily taken. Approaching the smokehouse, Clay stops, sensing the bear nearby. Suddenly, a dark figure lunges at him from behind a tree. Luckily, Clay is quick and sprays the bear with bear repellent, causing it to flee. Not scared, but exhilarated, Clay believes the bear will no longer covet his deer meat. He patrols the area, shouting, "Get out of my camp and don't come back." Day 36. Teresa hasn't eaten in days. Her fishing lines set up days ago have caught no fish. She had to search nearby for wild vegetables and fruits. While walking, she suddenly found a stranded small fish and excitedly picked it up. It was the first fish she had seen since the competition started. Just when she thought she was lucky, she found another larger fish that had drowned a short distance away. Her survival in the wilderness turned into scavenging. Such fish with unknown causes of death may carry deadly bacteria and are not recommended for eating. However, Teresa didn't care. After processing the fish by the lake, she happily returned to camp. Teresa, who had never eaten meat before, found it delicious. Day 37. Ross's shelter is frosted over. His frostbite has worsened, making walking difficult. He planned to get the rabbit meat left from a few days ago and make some soup to warm up. However, he started feeling dizzy and heard ringing in his ears before he could get there. This wasn't caused by frostbite, but severe malnutrition. Ross felt he couldn't continue and wanted to call the rescue team, but he didn't carry the communication pack, which was mandatory. Fortunately, the production team sends messages to contestants regularly. If a contestant does not respond within the set time, the rescue team is dispatched immediately. After examining Ross, the medical team diagnosed him with severe malnutrition and frostbite, requiring him to leave the contest and be hospitalized to avoid life-threatening risks. Although reluctant, Ross physically couldn't continue. After more than 30 days, having eaten only half a rabbit, walking was a struggle. He had to be carried onto the boat. With Ross's departure, only 4 contestants remained, all looking forward to day 45 when they could set gill nets for fishing. Colt, aiming for the $3 million prize, survived over 30 days in this survival challenge. He hoped to find animal tracks after the snowfall but found none near the camp. He tried fishing again and unexpectedly found a dead bird floating quietly on the lake's surface. After Teresa found 2 dead fish, Colt also found food. Many suspected these were staged by the production team, but the dissected bird, filled with worms in its organs, dispelled such thoughts. Eating such food could be deadly. However, Colt, having lost 60 pounds, dreamt of eating a meal of bird and mushroom stew. This could help him survive until day 45, when he could set fishing nets. The turning point for victory would come then, provided his health held up. Day 38, Bick shivered inside the cabin, curled up from the cold. His shelter looked big and sturdy, but he hadn't sealed the gaps around the roof and walls. With temperatures dropping to -40 degrees, he planned to upgrade it in one day. Bick collected moss from around the camp and brought it inside. Next was the long and tedious process of filling the gaps. Once done, he lit the fireplace, instantly warming the shelter. With day 45 approaching, Bick started making fishing nets early, confident in his gill net fishing skills. After some busy time, he finally crafted the net, expertly made. The next few days would be tough. To pass the time until he could fish, he meticulously made a wooden soup spoon, cut off excess belt material to make a sheath for his troll knife, and even crafted a sign for his shelter. Since finding the dead fish, Teresa walked with her head down every time she came to the shore. Not every trip was lucky. Today, although she didn't find any dead fish, she unexpectedly found half a packet of rose hips. She went back to the shelter to continue making fish traps. Previously, while processing the dead fish by the lake, she noticed many small fish eating its organs. Since fishing seemed hopeless, she thought catching small fish for soup might work. Teresa had set an anchor in the lake center and planned to use the fish line on the anchor as a slide rope to send the fish cage into deeper water without entering the water. The plan sounded perfect, but the fish cage got stuck halfway. Teresa pulled hard, but it wouldn't budge. She enjoyed the challenge, though it puzzled her why she couldn't just add some stones or roll up her pants to solve the depth issue. She deeply suspected it was a performance for her benefit. Colt was the most likely to catch big fish. Other contestants, even if they made gill nets, would struggle to place them in deep water. Colt was different. His small boat paired with a professional gill net might turn the tide in this survival challenge. His meticulously made floats showed his high standards for gill netting, taking a whole day to make. At 2 a.m., a fierce wind woke Colt. He worried about his boat by the lake. Upon checking, he found minor damage. He reinforced it before daring to go back to sleep. Finally, day 45 arrived, and the contestants could use their gill nets. Colt immediately reinforced his boat after waking up. Winning the $3 million depended on this boat, and he didn't want to fail at this critical moment. He installed new keels inside the boat, making it much sturdier than before. Ready, Colt took his net and headed for the deep water to find a suitable spot to set it. The camera shifts to Bick's side. He's been unable to sleep since before dawn. A few days ago, he had prepared his fishing net, looking forward to this day. To ensure his net could reach deeper waters, Bick cut down a slim, long tree to use as a pole. During the net-making process, he noted his weight loss, having successfully lost 60 kilograms. The net has become his hope to persevere. After some busy preparations, the net finally entered the water. He then secured the pole with stones and waited for a miracle to happen. And a miracle did occur. 2 bears from the bear family, thinking Bick was a clothed companion, slowly swam towards him. Bick quickly shouted at them and sounded his bear whistle, causing the bears to reluctantly leave. The scene switches to Clay, who seems to spend more time eating and sleeping, which is why his footage is only now appearing. While others are hurriedly casting their nets, he has started a leisure project. The moss is not for decorating his home, but for making archery targets. After the leisure activity, Clay also began to set up his fishing net. To reach deeper waters, he had previously placed an anchor in the lake and was now making a pulley system on shore. The structure was made with a stable triangular framework, and the top was equipped with a wire loop, allowing for easy handling of the net. As Clay explained his setup, he suddenly saw a chance for food. A duck was feeding nearby. Clay drew his bow fully and fired without aiming, deciding to let the duck go after all. This missed shot wasn't due to poor archery skills, but because the waves pushed the duck up by a centimeter. Clay then continued to set up his net. After witnessing his flashy moves, it's hard not to criticize Clay a bit. He often uses a strategy of pretending ignorance, but ended up making the largest net and constructing a complete trawling system. Finally, it's Colt's time to collect his net. Given that his net was in a deeper area, the chances of catching big fish were high. As Colt started pulling the rope, 2 large fish gradually surfaced. Bick has survived over 60 days in the wild, with nearby berries and wild vegetables now depleted. Out of necessity, he had to resort to eating a small tree. He cut down the tree trunk and the inner bark layer with a sense of guilt. Although pine meat contains digestible sugars and starch, the side effects are significant, including nausea, constipation, and dizziness. But when Bick thinks of his unborn child and his current unsuccessful situation, he must find a way to keep going. After cooking the bark, Bick treated it like a pot of meat soup because cooked pine bark really resembles it. He had seen other contestants withdraw because of eating bark, so he avoided meat and wanted just to drink some soup for energy. However, the taste of this soup was quite challenging to swallow. Even though Bick was extremely hungry, he could only manage a few sips. Bick hadn't stopped looking for other food sources. He had moved his fishing net to a new location a few days ago and checked it regularly. The outcome was the same as usual. Not only did the net fail to catch fish, but he also couldn't find anything along the shore. Thinking of how Sam from Season 5 managed by enduring hunger, Bick believed he could do the same. Snow flurries outside the shelter where Teresa crafts by hand. Watching her whittle sticks for broom handles, I worry she might cut herself like last time. After finishing the broom, she tests its effectiveness. However, living off berries has left her nearly too weak to stand, causing dizziness after a few sweeps. She has to rest again, but the fire inside has gone out. Exhausted, she gathers firewood and unexpectedly finds deer tracks, boosting her spirits. Catching a deer would win her $500,000, but her physical state makes it unrealistic. With no choice, she returns to the shelter with the firewood on day 69, emaciated but still washing her underwear, showing her innate refinement. After resting, she receives a message for a routine medical check. Fearing disqualification, she undergoes an examination, revealing her weight has dropped to 84 kilograms and her heart rate has increased by 20%. Doctors warn of permanent damage or even heart failure if she stays. For safety, she must leave. Teresa tearfully asks for a moment alone to wipe her tears, as she dislikes crying in front of others. Disappointed yet understanding, she knows she must go. Her resilience as a girl is admirable. Now, only Bick and Clay remain in a final showdown. Who will win the $500,000? A mysterious creature appears at the camp late at night. Clay, who was sound asleep, is startled but stays inside since his deer meat ran out 3 days ago, not fearing any loss. Facing a food crisis with his weight down 20%, he checks his fishing net first thing in the morning, only to find it tangled and empty. Realizing he cannot waste more time on it, he decides to hunt in the forest. Bick fares worse, suffering from indigestion after eating bark. Knowing this can't continue, he arms himself with a bow and arrow. Just when I expect to witness his hunting, he spots wild onions and can barely move. Throwing aside his bow, he starts digging, salivating at the thought. His excitement surpasses that of a wedding. Back at camp, he fries and stews the onions, finding them more delicious than a seafood feast. With food, Bick's confidence grows, guessing at most one competitor remains. Determined for his 2 daughters, he perseveres. The camera shifts to Clay. He hasn't eaten for several days. He set a few traps in the forest the day before yesterday to catch rabbits. Though the first trap had footprints nearby, it was empty. However, the second trap caught a snow hare, a timely blessing amid hardship, providing enough energy for at least 3 days. It's hard not to win with such luck, yet Clay wondered why he hadn't started trapping earlier. Why hadn't the other contestants thought of hunting rabbits? After catching the rabbit, Clay performed a mukbang that night, savoring his food more than ever. He even made boiled rabbit head taste spicy and crispy, making me crave a taste too. That night, while Clay slept soundly, he suddenly heard noises outside. Cautiously, he opened the door and found a fisher, a relative of the honey badger with strong aggression and skilled at hunting rodents, including lynxes and porcupines. Clay worried about his traps, fearing the fisher might have gotten to his catch first. As for why he didn't treat the fisher as a takeaway delivery, you'll find out later. On day 70 of the challenge, Clay's belt no longer fit, a clear sign of his weight loss. His first task was to check the traps, and his suspicions were confirmed. A sense of foreboding arose as he found fisher tracks nearby, likely having checked the traps before him. Even if the traps caught rabbits, the fisher might have intercepted them. Indeed, Clay found rabbit fur and blood on the ground, indicating the unfortunate fate of the rabbit, critical for his $500,000 prize. Frustrated and helpless against the fisher due to the rules prohibiting harm, Clay contemplated tying it up until the contest ended. On day 71, Bick missed his home, but to win the $500,000 prize, he had to keep looking for food. Visibly weak, he needed to slide down to the lake for water and relied solely on nature's gifts. Returning to camp, Bick experienced palpitations, feeling dizzy and nearly collapsing. He had to sit down in his shelter to rest, struggling to hold on, apologizing to his wife while wiping away tears. Clay was also thinking about his wife. They have been together since they became adults. This period of solitary wilderness survival was the longest they had ever been apart. Clay took out a family photo which he had been afraid to look at, fearing it would make him homesick. Sure enough, as soon as he saw his wife and children, he couldn't stop the tears from flowing. On day 73, Bick finally couldn't hold on any longer. To join the Wilderness Survival Challenge, he had quit his job, putting all his eggs in one basket, hoping to improve his family's life. However, his body couldn't take it anymore. Over 70 days, he had only eaten 2 small fish and relied on wild vegetables and berries. He had endured enough for his family. Although his performance wasn't very exciting, I think he didn't disgrace himself. I believe he can definitely be a good father. With Bick's departure, Clay became the season's final winner, though he was unaware of this at the time and still worried about failing the medical checkup. The production team, quite mischievously, kept a straight face when they saw him, conducted a series of medical exams, and then asked if he could continue. Clay seriously claimed he could last 90 days, to which the crew responded, "It's time to go home, buddy. You've been here longer than anyone else." This season's story ends here. Clay's victory was well deserved. If you liked it, please follow my channel.